The news no one ever wanted to hear has finally arrived. Robert Redford, one of the most iconic and beloved figures in Hollywood history, has passed away. His passing didn't just mark the end of a career, it marked the closing of a golden era in film. For more than 6 decades, Redford was more than just an actor. He was a storyteller, a trailblazer, and a symbol of timeless charm and integrity. From his earliest days on screen, he carried an aura that made audiences believe in the characters he played. And when he stepped behind the camera, he inspired a new generation of filmmakers to dream even bigger. The world of entertainment has lost legends before, but Redford's passing feels different. It feels heavier, like a chapter of cinema itself has been torn away. Tributes began pouring in almost immediately, from fellow actors, from directors who admired him, and from the very festival he founded that reshaped independent film forever. But as powerful as all of those messages were, nothing captured the depth of his life, career, and friendships quite like what happened at his funeral. Hollywood royalty gathered in one place to honor him. The most respected names in film shared stories, memories, and heartfelt words. Yet in the middle of all the tributes, one stood out. One speech silenced the room and brought tears to even the most stoic faces. It wasn't just a farewell, it was poetry, a reminder of love, friendship, and legacy. And it came from the woman who shared some of his most iconic on-screen moments, Jane Fonda. But before we get to her unforgettable words, let's take a moment to remember the legacy of Robert Redford, the man, the myth, the legend, and why his passing has left such an irreplaceable void. Robert Redford wasn't just another actor in Hollywood. He was the actor who redefined what it meant to be a star. Born in Santa Monica in 1936, Redford came from modest beginnings and carried that grounded, approachable spirit with him throughout his career. In a time when Hollywood was overflowing with glamorous leading men, Redford stood out for his mix of charm, rugged good looks, and an authenticity that made his characters unforgettable. His breakthrough came in the late 1960s with Barefoot in the Park and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. In the latter, his pairing with Paul Newman gave audiences one of the greatest duos in film history. Their chemistry was electric, their banter effortless, and together they created a film that is still considered one of the greatest buddy movies of all time. Redford's role as the Sundance Kid didn't just make him a star, it cemented him as a cultural icon. But he wasn't satisfied with just being the golden boy of Hollywood. Redford pushed himself into roles that challenged the audience's perception of him. In The Sting, he once again partnered with Newman to deliver a dazzling tale of con men and redemption, winning an Academy Award for Best Picture. In All the President's Men, he portrayed journalist Bob Woodward, turning a scandal into a gripping cinematic masterpiece that influenced how Hollywood told stories of truth and power. His career as a director was just as remarkable. In 1980, Redford directed Ordinary People, his very first film behind the camera, and it went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, as well as Best Director for him personally. That moment proved he wasn't just a face on screen, he was a creative force who could shape narratives from every angle. And then came Sundance. Redford didn't just act and direct, he built an institution. In 1981, he founded the Sundance Institute and its annual film festival, which became a platform for independent voices that would otherwise go unheard. From Quentin Tarantino to Steven Soderbergh, countless filmmakers found their first break because of Sundance. In many ways, Redford wasn't just telling his own stories, he made sure others had the chance to tell theirs too. Even in his later years, Redford refused to fade into the background. He gave powerful performances in films like All Is Lost and Our Souls at Night, where he reunited with Jane Fonda. These projects weren't about box office numbers or critical acclaim anymore. They were about storytelling, the pure love of the craft. Robert Redford's life was one long, extraordinary love letter to cinema. And as Hollywood gathered to mourn his loss, it was clear that no single tribute could capture everything he meant. Yet at his funeral, people tried, and they did so with tears, laughter, and memories that stretched across decades. But how exactly did Hollywood come together for this farewell? The funeral of Robert Redford wasn't just an event, it was a moment in history. Held in Los Angeles, the service was private, but filled with the kind of names you rarely see in one place. It was as though the very foundation of Hollywood had gathered under one roof to honor him. Actors, directors, producers, and protégés came from across the world. Each person carried their own memory of Redford, whether it was a personal friendship, a shared project, or simply the influence he had on their careers. The pews were lined with legends. Veteran stars like Meryl Streep, Dustin Hoffman, and Warren Beatty sat shoulder to shoulder with younger talents like Leonardo DiCaprio and Natalie Portman, who openly credited Redford as an inspiration. Directors such as Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, and Francis Ford Coppola were there, standing quietly in reverence, their presence alone speaking volumes about the impact he had on the art of filmmaking. But beyond the stars, it was the presence of his family that gave the ceremony its deepest emotional weight. Redford's children and grandchildren filled the front rows, some holding back tears while others openly wept. They weren't just saying goodbye to a public figure, but to the man they called father and grandfather. As much as Hollywood claimed him as one of its brightest lights, to them he was simply Dad or Grandpa Bob. The atmosphere was heavy, yet warm. Stories floated in whispers even before the official tributes began. Tales of Redford's kindness on set, his sharp sense of humor, and his passion for storytelling. People remembered him not only for his legendary performances, but also for the quiet moments moments, his generosity with younger actors, his refusal to play into the vanity of fame, and his fierce loyalty to his friends. As the service continued, one by one, people rose to speak. Some told funny anecdotes that drew soft laughter through tears, while others spoke with such reverence that the entire room seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't Hollywood pageantry. It was real, and it was raw. And while every tribute was meaningful, it was clear the audience was waiting for one in particular. They wanted to hear from the woman who had stood beside Redford on screen for decades, the one whose bond with him went beyond scripts and cameras. They were waiting for Jane Fonda, because while every star in that room had a story to tell, Jane Fonda had lived a unique chapter of his life with him, and her words would prove to be unforgettable. As the service unfolded, the depth of Robert Redford's influence became impossible to ignore. Every speaker, whether a peer from his early days or a rising star he inspired, seemed to echo the same sentiment. Redford wasn't just a great actor, he was a man who changed lives. The first to speak was Warren Beatty, his longtime contemporary and sometimes rival in the industry. Beatty recalled their early years, when Hollywood was dominated by studio systems and larger-than-life figures. He described Redford as someone who carried himself with quiet dignity, never playing the games others played. He wasn't interested in being the loudest voice in the room, Beatty said softly. He wanted to be the truest. His words drew nods from the audience, a reminder that even among giants, Redford was unique. Meryl Streep followed, her voice heavy with emotion. She shared a memory from the set of Out of Africa, where the two had created some of the most enduring romantic scenes in film history. She laughed through tears as she recounted how Redford insisted on doing his own hair during a key scene, claiming no stylist could capture the rugged realism he wanted. He was meticulous, sometimes maddeningly so, she said, smiling through her grief, but that was Robert. Every detail mattered because every detail told the truth. Then came Leonardo DiCaprio, representing a younger generation of actors who had grown up idolizing Redford. DiCaprio credited Redford for not only inspiring his career, but also shaping the industry in ways most actors never could. He spoke about how Sundance had given countless filmmakers, many of them DiCaprio's collaborators, their very first chance. He didn't just open doors, DiCaprio said, pausing as his voice cracked. He built the doors, and then he handed us the keys. Directors also stepped forward. Martin Scorsese spoke about Redford's courage in tackling social issues when others stayed silent. He used his fame for something greater than himself, Scorsese noted. He risked his career to tell stories that mattered, and he never looked back. Steven Spielberg followed with a story about Redford's generosity, recalling how Redford once gave up a lucrative role to make way for a younger actor who needed the break more than he did. Even Francis Ford Coppola, known for his fiery temperament, spoke with a calm reverence. Robert never raised his voice to be heard, Coppola said. He just was heard. That's power, that's grace. Each tribute built upon the last, painting a portrait of a man who was both larger than life and deeply human. Some spoke of his humor, recalling his sly wit and playful sarcasm. Others focused on his integrity, noting how he refused to bend under the weight of fame. By the time the last of these voices trailed off, the audience was visibly moved, eyes red, cheeks damp, hearts heavy. But through it all, there was an unspoken anticipation. People were waiting for one voice above all. Because while Robert Redford had countless collaborators, friends, and admirers, there was one woman whose bond with him stretched across decades, one relationship that captured the very essence of his career. The murmurs grew quiet as Jane Fonda rose from her seat. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Jane Fonda walked slowly to the podium, her presence commanding the room without effort. At 80-something, she still carried the same poise that made her one of the most respected women in Hollywood. And yet there was something different about her that day. It wasn't the award-winning actress or the activist who stood before them. It was the woman who had shared a lifetime of moments with Robert Redford, both on and off the screen. Their history together was the stuff of cinematic legend. Their first collaboration, Barefoot in the Park in 1967, showed a young Redford and Fonda as newlyweds learning the messiness of love and life. The film's humor, warmth, and intimacy turned them into one of Hollywood's most adored on-screen couples. Audiences weren't just watching characters, they were watching chemistry so real it felt like it belonged to something more. Years later, they reunited in The Electric Horseman, a film that showcased Redford's rugged charisma alongside Fonda's fierce independence. By then, they weren't just young stars, they were seasoned performers who understood the depth of human connection. Every glance, every laugh, every line they delivered carried an authenticity born not just of acting, but of genuine friendship. Their bond continued into the later years of their careers. In 2017, they reunited once more for Our Souls at Night, a Netflix film that became a quiet triumph. The story of two aging neighbors who find comfort in each other mirrored their own relationship. Decades of shared history, trust, and affection. Critics and audiences alike noted how natural their performances felt, as though the script had simply been written around their lives. But beyond the films, their real-life friendship endured. Through marriages, divorces, activism, and careers that often took them down very different paths, Fonda and Redford always found their way back to each other. She often referred to him as the most significant male presence in her professional life, and he once admitted that working with her brought out some of his most honest performances. That's what made her presence at the funeral so powerful. She wasn't just another co-star. She wasn't just another Hollywood legend offering words of admiration. She was Robert Redford. Redford's partner in art, in history, and in life's quiet moments that no camera ever captured. As she reached the podium, the room seemed to lean forward, hanging on her every breath. What would she say? How could she possibly put into words the legacy of a man who had shaped so much of her life and the lives of countless others? The silence was absolute as Jane Fonda began to speak. Jane Fonda stood at the podium, her hands lightly resting on the wood, her eyes searching the crowd before lowering for a moment of stillness. The silence was heavy, expectant, as if everyone in the room knew they were about to witness something unforgettable. She took a deep breath, and when she began, her voice was steady, calm, but filled with the kind of weight that comes only with decades of shared history. "Robert," she said softly, pausing as though she yet was speaking directly to him, "was more than a co-star to me. He was a mirror." Her words cut through the room like glass, striking everyone with their intimacy. She spoke about their very first film together, Barefoot in the Park. She recalled how nervous she had been, and how Redford, already charming, already confident, had leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, Jane, I'll make sure we don't fall flat on our faces." The audience chuckled quietly, picturing the young Redford in his prime, carrying that boyish grin. But then her tone deepened. She admitted that she'd always admired the way Redford carried his fame. Unlike so many others of their era, he never seemed consumed by it. He never played the part of a star, she said. He just was himself. And somehow, that was always enough. More than enough. Her voice wavered as she recounted their long journey together. From The Electric Horseman to Our Souls at Night, she described how each project felt like a new chapter in their friendship, as though the universe kept finding ways to bring them back into each other's lives. She confessed that in some ways, Redford represented consistency in her world, someone who had been there at the beginning of her career, and again in its later chapters. Working with Robert was never work, she continued, her eyes glistening. It was like breathing, natural, effortless. He made me better, not just as an actress, but as a person. Then came the moment that silenced even the quiet shuffling of the crowd. Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hand to her chest as though steadying her heart. "I always thought we'd have one more film," she whispered. "One more chance to laugh together on set, to sit in the quiet after a long day, to remember how lucky we were. But life doesn't always give us one more." The room was utterly still. Even those who had sat through countless memorials knew they were witnessing something rare, a raw, unfiltered outpouring of love and grief. She ended with a line that would echo in the memories of everyone present. Robert Redford didn't just make movies, he made moments. And those moments are stitched into the fabric of who we are. For me, he will always be the partner I could trust to catch me when I stumbled. And I will miss him every single day. When she stepped back from the podium, her eyes wet but her shoulders strong, the entire room rose in unison. No one needed to be prompted. The standing ovation wasn't just for Jane Fonda's tribute. It was for the decades of history she had carried to that podium, and for the man whose absence now felt sharper than ever. The room lingered in silence long after Jane Fonda returned to her seat. It was as though her words had wrapped themselves around every heart present, refusing to let go. Many funerals are remembered for the collective grief, but this one would forever be remembered for a single voice. A voice that spoke not just of Robert Redford's career, but of his soul. Seasoned actors wiped away tears they rarely allowed the public to see. Meryl Streep leaned over to squeeze Jane's hand, whispering something only the two of them could hear. Younger stars like Natalie Portman and Leonardo DiCaprio sat motionless, visibly moved by the intimacy of what they had just witnessed. Even directors known for their hardened exteriors, men like Scorsese and Coppola, bowed their heads, their eyes shining. What made her tribute so unforgettable wasn't just the content of her words, it was the honesty. In an industry often criticized for its scripted emotions and polished facades, Jane Fonda had spoken with the kind of vulnerability that could never be rehearsed. She hadn't spoken about Hollywood legends or cinematic milestones. She had spoken about Robert, the man, her friend, her partner in art. Reporters and attendees alike would later remark that her speech changed the atmosphere of the entire service. Until that point, the funeral had been filled with reverence and admiration. Yes, but it had also felt like a celebration of a legend. After Fonda's tribute, it became something more intimate, a farewell to a man who was deeply loved. It was as if she had peeled away the glamour of Hollywood and revealed the truth. Behind the fame, the awards, the headlines, Robert Redford was simply a human being who had touched lives in profound and personal ways. Her words gave permission for others to cry openly, to mourn not just the icon, but the friend, the father, the grandfather, the man who had laughed and stumbled and lived just like the rest of them. In the days that followed, news outlets would highlight her eulogy as the centerpiece of the event. Clips of her speech circulated online, sparking an outpouring of love from fans across the globe. Social media was flooded with memories, photos, and messages, many repeating the same phrase: Robert Redford made moments. And perhaps that was the true power of Jane Fonda's tribute. She didn't just honor his career, she reminded everyone that Redford's greatest gift wasn't just what he gave to cinema, but what he gave to the people who knew him. Her words would be remembered as the emotional climax of his farewell, a moment that turned grief into gratitude, loss into legacy. For everyone in attendance, and for millions watching from afar, Jane Fonda's stunning tribute ensured that Robert Redford's story would never truly end. Long after the funeral ended, Jane Fonda's words continued to echo. Guests who had been there carried her voice with them, repeating fragments of her eulogy as though they were lines from a beloved film. Her tribute had struck a chord so deep deep that it lingered in every conversation afterward, in the quiet car rides home, in hushed hotel lobbies, even in the reflective silence of those who couldn't quite find words of their own. For Hollywood, the ripple effect was immediate. Younger actors who had admired Redford from afar found themselves rewatching his films, rediscovering what made him a legend. Directors revisited the works he championed through Sundance, realizing just how much of today's cinema carried his fingerprints. His name began trending worldwide, not simply because of his passing, but because Jane Fonda's tribute had reignited the conversation about who he was, not just as an artist, but as a man. Fans across the globe joined in. Social media feeds filled with clips of his iconic roles, the mischievous grin in The Sting, the intense focus in All the President's Men, the breathtaking vulnerability in All Is Lost. Alongside those clips were Jane Fonda's words, shared again and again. Robert Redford didn't just make movies. He made moments. It was rare, almost unheard of, for a single eulogy to define how the world remembered a figure so monumental. Yet somehow, Jane had done it. Her tribute didn't overshadow the others. It elevated them, weaving them together into a larger story. Everyone else had painted Robert Redford in shades of brilliance, but Jane Fonda had given him depth, warmth, humanity. She had reminded the world that behind the myth was a man who laughed, stumbled, and cared deeply for the people around him. In the weeks that followed, magazines and newspapers ran features not just on Redford's career, but on his lifelong bond with Jane Fonda. Critics reflected on their collaborations, noting how their on-screen chemistry was rooted in a friendship that lasted nearly 60 years. For many, her tribute became the emotional lens through which they revisited Redford's life, adding a layer of intimacy to an already monumental legacy. And for those who had been there in person, one memory stood out above all: the sight of Jane Fonda at the podium, her voice trembling yet unbroken, saying goodbye not to a legend but to a friend. The funeral of Robert Redford was not just a farewell to a Hollywood icon, it was a reminder of the power of legacy, friendship, and love. Tributes poured in from the greatest names in the industry, each one painting a picture of a man who had left an indelible mark on film and culture. Yet it was Jane Fonda's words that gave the farewell its soul, transforming grief into gratitude and ensuring that Redford's memory would endure not just as a star, but as a man who mattered. Redford's life was extraordinary, but it wasn't just defined by awards, box office numbers, or accolades. It was defined by the people he touched, by the colleagues who trusted him, by the audiences who believed in him, and by the friends who loved him. In the end, Jane Fonda reminded us that the true measure of a person isn't in the spotlight they commanded, but in the moments they created along the way. As Hollywood slowly moved forward, one thing became clear. Robert Redford's passing closed a chapter, but it didn't end the story. His films remain, his festival continues to launch new voices, and his influence runs through the veins of modern cinema. Thanks to Jane Fonda's stunning tribute, his memory was not one of sorrow, but of celebration. A celebration of moments, of love, of art, and of life itself. And so, the final curtain fell on Robert Redford's remarkable journey. But in every frame of film, in every director who found their voice at Sundance, and in every person who hears Jane Fonda's words echoing through time, his presence will remain. Because legends may leave us, but their stories never fade. And Robert Redford's story, stitched together by friendship, by love, and by unforgettable moments, will be told for generations to come.